is not just our theme, is our collective mission. As we delve into this discussion that promised to enlighten, as we engage, let us remember the words of the great George Bernard Shaw. We are made wise not by the recollection of our past, but by the responsibility of our future. So let us take on this opportunity to reflect on the giants whose shoulders we stand upon, who see it fit to reposition this institution as a co-educational institution in 2001, and to rekindle the spirit of innovation that will propel us in the future, ripen with potential. Together we are not just audience and participants today. In this event, we are architects of the future, curators of the past, and the bridge that connects them. Thank you for being an integral part of this pivotal journey. Let us begin this lecture. And I'll invite Dr. Thompson to do our prayer.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Let us welcome the presence of God. Let us pray. Abba Father, we thank you for who you are. We magnify your name. We glorify you. We thank you that from before time began, you thought about Shortwood Teachers College. This afternoon, we pray your presence, even as we will continue to learn from these lectures. We thank you for the presenter. We pray that she will utter what you want our aspiring students to hear, because they are going to effect change. And Lord, we want you to be part of that change. We want you to be the center. And so we thank you, we bless your name, and we know that at the end of this event, we would have learned much, and we would have been grateful that we would have been here. We praise you, we lift you on high, and we pray in the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. Amen.
So now we'll have an item from the SJC choir. Okay. Okay, I'm sorry. What I'm seeing here is SGC choir. All right.
chills in plenty town. Cardboard hotels, they sleep on the ground.
Hard choices, how to respond. Red or rose with a dark orange.
We must say that is wonderful singing, don't it? All right. And so we have our principal, Miss Nadine Malloy, to do our welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cooper. I greet everyone well this afternoon. It is my very pleasurable task to welcome you all and to give some brief remarks. I won't attempt to compete with our guest lecturer, but I want to welcome you warmly to Shortwood Teachers College. I wish to acknowledge at this time our chairman, Mr. Grantley Stevenson. We should have with us the Mexican ambassador, Mr. Juan Jose Gonzalez Miares. How did I do, Dr. Morris? Good. We want to welcome past chairman of the board, someone I've known for quite a while, Mr. Earl Richards. Welcome, sir. We want to welcome past principals, Dr. Christopher Clark, and more recently, a past principal, Dr. George Dawkins. We also want to welcome other members of the board who are present. We want to welcome Mrs. Renee Williams-Brown from the Ministry of Education, a Shortwoodite as well. We acknowledge the presence of our vice principals, acting vice principal and vice principal, Dr. Barrett March and Reverend Dr. Mrs. Downer Massas. Our lecturers, of course, very special guests with us. We want to welcome Mrs. Norma Darlington's husband and family, daughter and granddaughter. A very, very special welcome to you. we have our guest speaker, or guest lecturer rather, who is, we're welcoming her home, Dr. Carmel, Professor Carmel Roof. Students, you can't be tired yet. I'm not sure if I'm missing, if I'm not seeing anyone from the Shortwood Old Students Association. Please feel yourselves welcome. I'm not seeing anyone now. If I'm missing the individuals, please make yourself welcome. We also want to welcome those persons who are here from the Caribbean School of Medical Sciences and the principals of our satellite centers at Central High School and Geisel High School. Welcome, welcome everyone. I hope I didn't miss anyone. The Founders Day lecture, the overview. Mrs. Norma Hope Darlington, CD, past principal of Shortwood Teachers College, made an invaluable contribution to education in Jamaica in a stellar career lasting over 41 years. As principal of the Shortwood Teachers College from 1989 to 2002, she initiated the annual Founders Day lecture and the bachelor's program in early childhood education in collaboration with the University of the West Indies, Mona campus. She also conceptualized and initiated the Early Childhood Center of Excellence located on this very campus. We think it is now timely, as we honor her memory, that we revisit the original plans to complete this project. Thank you, Chris. The original design intended to provide, and I thank Junior, our assistant plant manager, for bringing this to my attention. The original plans to complete this project, it intended to provide for the Caribbean a model for best practices in all aspects of early childhood education, namely research, teacher preparation, and caregiving. This means then that we are to pursue the completion of the building to include the 2 wings to host a resource center and a daycare. We should take the next steps, and I know the Ministry of Education is here, to continue to extend Mrs. Darlington's impact on education here at Shortwood and beyond. We need to make this a reality. And I just want to make an editorial comment to say every single member of a staff, every stakeholder is very important. The first person that shared this with me was a member of our ancillary staff. Please put your hands together for Junior. The main objective of the Founders Day lecture is to provoke the Shortwood community to think critically and intellectually about current and relevant issues that directly or indirectly have an impact on education. Shortwood has been able to keep this mandate alive by engaging speakers such as former prime ministers, university professors, and leading practitioners from varying vocations as they explored forward-thinking and diverse topics. Today we continue the trend and are pleased to welcome our very own Professor Carmel Roof. Welcome again, and thank you for being willing to share with us. I just want to make a few comments before I take my seat. We are operating in a space where education, and in particular for our purposes, teacher training is front and center stage. Just recently, I read an article that was arguing for those of us in teacher training who are university trained versus those of us who are college trained, and who is better and who can do what better. I want to posit to us that both legs on which we stand in this business called teacher training is important. We need, at this level, to revisit and reimagine and improve upon how we deliver content, how we engage our students to engage themselves, if I may put it that way, to continue to build their own capacities. So that discussion becomes a moot point, whether or not you have the content that you need to make the difference. We are masters in the Teachers College setting at delivering how best to teach, the methodology portion of it. It equips you to do awesome things in a classroom. It gives you the skills, it makes you adaptable, and it helps you to focus. This afternoon, as we go into this lecture, which I believe is going to be very thought-provoking, knowing who the lecturer is, I want us to think on how we balance both of these elements and how, if I may use a very colloquial way of saying it, step up our game in order to ensure that we integrate both. We ensure that professional development is a personal and lifelong commitment, because we have a charge, we have a responsibility. We cannot escape the fact that we are called upon to have a significant impact on students, whether it is through emotional intelligence, whether it is through how we manage our own stress levels, how we are resilient, and in turn teach our students to be resilient. Whether we are culturally relevant, whether we understand, as our value statements say, how to be collaborative, how we engage in reflective practice, and how we motivate ourselves to always, always do better than we did the day before. And so with those comments, I want to welcome you, and I ask that we pay keen attention to all that is shared with us. Thank you so much, and have an awesome rest of the afternoon.
All right, so as we move along swiftly, we will invite our board chairman, Mr. Stevenson, to bring us greetings.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Guest lecturer, Dr. Roof, past principals, who I haven't seen for a little while, Dr. Clark, Dr. Dawkins, and past chairman, Mr. Richards, principal, Mr. Darlington and family, Mrs. Renee Williams-Brown, vice principals, lecturers, and students. I would like to add my own welcome to you this afternoon, because we are in fact celebrating a very special occasion. 139 years. That is no small feat. Unlike most of the West Indies cricketers, once they get to a century, they give up and get out. But Dr. Dawkins is familiar with cricket. Knows a little about that. But instead, we are planning for the future. And in fact, our acting principal has gotten the team together, and we are working on our strategic plan, which is going to take us into the future, given the changes that are taking place in our environment. The way that teaching is done is changing and has changed significantly. And we are taking all of this into what we are doing. And so when next you get here, you will be seeing a different set of classrooms. I'm not sure where Miss Malloy is getting all the funding to do this. But we certainly intend to do this. We want to change Shortwood Teachers College to make it the institution of preference. And so, ladies and gentlemen, my task is not to make a speech this afternoon, but just to add my own welcome. And is very happy to see so many of us. And in fact, I think the students here should be inspired because our presenter is a graduate of Shortwood Teachers College. And therefore, it demonstrates what you can achieve if you work at it. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, and please enjoy our presentation this afternoon. Thank you.
So we are streaming live on our Shortwood YouTube channel, and so you can share the link with your friends on the different social media platforms. All right. So now, for our introduction, I invite Miss Ashanil Gale to do this presentation, and also Professor Ruth to come forward while she introduces you. So, come forward.
Good afternoon. Dr. Carmel Roof is a professor of curriculum studies in the School of Education at the University of the West Indies, Mona. She holds a PhD and Master of Philosophy in Curriculum Development from the University of the West Indies, Mona, a Bachelor's in Education from the University of Technology, Jamaica, and a Diploma in Teaching from Shortwood Teachers College. Her career in teaching spans 29 years of combined service at the secondary and higher education levels of the education system. Her current role at the UWI Mona entails being the program coordinator for master's and doctoral program in curriculum studies, coordinator of the Association for Graduate Researchers in Education, AGRE, and president of the Caribbean Association for the Advancement of Curriculum Studies. She has also served as Deputy Dean for Undergraduate and Graduate Matters within the Faculty of Humanities and Education. As an educator and an active researcher, she has offered her services to numerous schools and training institutions locally and internationally in the areas of curriculum and instructional planning and delivery, curriculum policy and evaluation, competency-based education and training, and leadership. She has served as a visiting research fellow and engaged in international collaborations at several international universities across the world. Professor Roof has authored and co-authored 4 books, 5 special issue journal volumes, 18 peer-reviewed book chapters, 38 peer-reviewed journal articles, and delivered over 90 conference and specially invited presentations, regionally and internationally. She is the recipient of the UWI's Distinguished Teaching Award on 3 occasions and a recipient of the Society of Professors of Education Outstanding Book Award. I present you Professor Carmel Roof.
I was sharing with the principal that this is the part I do not like, the introduction. But that was such a fantastic introduction. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, our moderator for this afternoon, our board chairman, principal, thank you for the invitation, past principals, past board chairman, members of staff, vice principals, students, past lecturers, alumni, auxiliary staff, and everybody who there. Good evening. I want to say it brings me great pleasure to be back at Shortwood. Coming through the gates, you know, I remember all the things that used to happen. And of course, the wisdom tree that is sort of missing. But also seeing Mr. Clark and, sorry, is it Dr. Clark? Sorry. And Dr. Dawkins as two lecturers who I met when I started my journey here. My heart is filled with joy and gratitude. So this, let me go back. So this afternoon, as I share with you, and I'm so sorry, I need to get, because I wasn't expecting to come to the front at the time. When you reach a certain age, you have to wear these. Yes. So for this afternoon, it gives me great pleasure to be back here as a past student of Shortwood Teachers College to deliver the Norma Darlington's Founders Day lecture, and it is said to be the 34th lecture. As a student here, Mrs. Darlington was my principal. I recall her genuine smile, her calm demeanor. I recall the several conversations during principal option. And now that the rain is falling, I also recall her coming through the microphones and saying, "Ladies, rain stops nothing at Shortwood." So it's good to see her husband and daughter and granddaughter here as well. She was an excellent educator, not just by speech, but also by actions. As an educator myself, and it's actually for 34 years, I welcome this opportunity to share my perspectives. I would also like to say, I didn't plan to be so long, but it's going to be a lengthy lecture, having examined the theme and having looked at some of the things that I want to share. This theme provides us with a new dimension to how we reform, because I reflected on previous theme and they looked at the business of education reform. The theme calls us to reform using authentic experiences. In other words, the theme calls us to examine the role of authentic experiences in how we reform education. And for those who missed it, the theme is reforming education through authentic experiences. And I've added a question to it: are you ready? In sharing my perspectives on the theme with the latitude given to me to examine the theme how I see fit, I have decided to add that question: are you ready? And so I will share with you my thoughts on what I consider to be authentic experiences, of course linking this with education reform in Jamaica. I will also take a brief look at some of the equity issues based on how schooling evolved in Jamaica. and then look particularly at the tertiary sector and connect this, of course, with Shortwood Teachers College. And I will close with examining some possibilities for using authentic experiences. This, I am hoping, will stimulate further action, further thinking about what we need to do. I'd also like to say the education system is very complex. And so what I'm offering here this afternoon is but a short version of the system in its entirety. Reforming means to change. And creating change, of course, that is explicit, that is bold, easily seen. Changes that will result in improvement. But to create such changes that will lead to lasting improvements require a change of mindset. Importantly, changing mindset of people who were once enslaved. This therefore means that we need to look back at our colonial vestiges and free our minds from those that continue to shackle us. To do this, we must embrace a learning disposition, and our principal spoke about that just now. A learning disposition will help us to learn and unlearn and relearn as we discover new things about ourselves, our past, our present, and the future that we want to chart. The theme asks us to use authentic experiences to guide how we improve the education system in Jamaica. As a result, I will share what I understand authentic experiences to be. Authentic experiences are those events or occurrences that are real and genuine. So the theme is calling us to look at our education situation in Jamaica and see how best we can use real, genuine experiences to inform how we improve education. As we embrace this possibility, certain questions may emerge. Questions such as, how can we generate and implement solutions that will address the realities of the Jamaican education context in a realistic way? Another question that may emerge is this one. What are the actual events, situations, or occurrences that may be peculiar to our local Jamaican education context that we can use to improve the education that is offered? The assumption here is that perhaps we have not been doing this, or it could be that we have not been doing this enough. Authentic experiences are best shared through stories. And so we must also look at ourselves and ask these questions. In what ways are we documenting the stories from our lived realities to inform our education theory and practice in Jamaica? Essentially, how are we documenting tried and proven best practices, or what we call promising practices, and use them to improve the education that is offered? And to what extent are we involving those who have lived these experiences in decisions we make about what we need to improve in the Jamaican education system? Involving those who have lived the experiences in our decision making about how we improve the education system is crucial, because those who have lived the experiences possess wisdom in what I call the context orality. Orality of context means giving attention and recognition to the everyday language, knowledge, actions, and feelings of those in the situated context. Orality of context is important, as this is what will lead you to respecting indigenous ways of knowing and doing, and accepting alternative ways of functioning other than preconceived and predetermined theories and practices. Those who possess the lived experiences may not possess the concepts in the way we desire them, but they have the knowledge and wisdom about what has happened, what is happening, and what needs to happen. So when we involve those who have lived the experiences, it helps to broaden the range of understandings about an issue and solutions available to improve the system. For us to reform using authentic experiences, it also means that we must view our lived experiences as valuable to the process of reform. But valuing our lived experiences as useful in reforming the education system is not an easy task for a people who were once enslaved and a people who lack self-confidence. So a crucial aspect of this valuing is an ongoing process of decolonizing our thinking, or what I refer to as decolonizing our mindset. Let's look at one aspect of what we need to decolonize. We need to believe in our homegrown scholars produced by our very own institutions. Yes, this means believing and valuing our scholars who are from our very own institutions, that they are worthy, they are capable, and they are good as anyone else from outside our country context. It also involves viewing our teachers as capable, qualified leaders who possess excellent ideas that if we involve them in decision making, we can derive authentic ways of improving our education system. Decolonizing our thinking also requires us to be open to sharing power and being open to reducing hierarchical barriers that prevent collaboration. As a people who were once colonized, a part of the colonial legacy is the interpolation that took place, which causes us not to trust the knowledge that is produced by our own institutions. Such that if we think the knowledge is from someone who we see every day, someone who is next door, someone who we often talk to, we think it is not valuable, or we ascribe a lesser value to it. In other words, we think that if it is from Jamaica, it is inferior. And so we are always thinking that someone else other than ourselves is better than at fixing our problems. So we suffer from what I call the inferior-superior complex, and this plays out in many ways. It plays out in the respect we accord each other and the authority we ascribe to some people. So to use authentic experiences to reform, we must re-examine how we view ourselves, how we relate to each other, and the value we ascribe to the experiences we possess. We must also understand the identity of what we are reforming. In this case, it means understanding the pillars on which the education system in Jamaica was founded. For example, let's look at what's the status of the education system and why we need to reform. So journey with me briefly as I take a very brief socio-historical look. Because Jamaica was a colony of Britain, the education system evolved with strong British influence. And at its foundation, the aim of the education offered during British rule was to ensure colonial control and to instill British values. Once the enslaved received emancipation, the education of the ex-slaves was to ensure peaceful integration and a productive working class. According to Meditz and Henratty, within pre-independent Jamaica, there was limited availability of schools, especially beyond the primary level, and the education offered was irrelevant to meeting the needs of the society. This meant that mainly the wealthy and few exceptionally brilliant students from poor backgrounds were afforded schooling beyond primary level. At that time, the education received was to meet the needs of a colonial socio-economic and political structure. And as Thomas Brown in 2021 puts it, to intensify class divisions within the Jamaican society. The aim, therefore, of pre-independent elementary education was to train children of the working class to replace their parents as agricultural laborers. Fast forward to 1962, and having gained independence, access to education expanded to facilitate enrollment at the secondary level, and to reduce, of course, the socially segregated education based on class and color. However, though schooling expanded to consist of 4 levels, early childhood for ages 3 to 5, primary for ages 6 to 12, and secondary, it was separated at the secondary level based on social class into junior high school for children of the lower social class aged 12 to 15, and grades 7 to 9, and high schools which were originally established for middle to upper class children ages 12 to 17. So when we hear about the different types of schools in our sector, we need to understand where it's coming from. Additionally, and I must hasten to say that the Ministry of Education has done a fantastic job of trying to reduce some of these different types of schools. For example, all-age schools then turned to primary and junior high, and now we are eliminating primary and junior high to just have secondary schools. So that's an achievement. Additionally, the curriculum then for the various types of schools differed based on social class. The rationale of separate curriculum for each category of secondary school was based on what the government perceived as the social and economic agenda that each social group needed to fulfill. Since Jamaica's independence and up to 2024 today, Jamaica, several governments in Jamaica have worked to change perceptions of schools based on social and economic stratification. However, in 2016, Miller argued that in post-independent Jamaica, the education system still mirrors that of the British who ruled prior to Jamaica's independence. In other words, Jamaica operates a structure of schooling that is based on the legacy of the elitist and classist structure of the country as a British colony. Miller continued to argue that notwithstanding this, since gaining independence from British rule, Jamaica continues to pursue programs and policies that have led to increased access to education for a majority of the Jamaican population. Successive governments have sought to rebrand schools, and we know that, to change the schools to now call them all secondary schools, for example. Students through the grade 6 exit examination have access to a range of secondary schools, I think over 253. Students have access to a variety of examinations at the secondary level to qualify them for different pathways after secondary education and to get them to pursue tertiary education. And the students exiting secondary schools have access to at least 21 tertiary institutions. And these institutions keep growing. That's something to celebrate. So let's also think about the fact that from early childhood to tertiary institutions in 2024, every Jamaican child, regardless of race, regardless of color, regardless of socioeconomic status, has access to education at all levels. So as a country, that's a big achievement for us. Recently, as recent as April 2024, the Ministry of Education published its philosophy of education, which supports the expanded access, inclusivity, and it's on the slide, you can take a look at it. Appreciating our cultural heritage, environmental stewardship as aspects of providing quality education, and transforming education for national development. And though I've placed it there, I know that there are arguments in the sector about whether or not this really is the philosophy. So I just want to throw that in. But this is what is published as our philosophy for the time being. But schools in Jamaica are still varied, stratified, and suffer from what I call colonial legacy tensions. To date, perceptions about types of schools and the associated consequences remain the largest area of complexities and assumptions that ground inequities in Jamaica. At every level of schooling, Jamaicans are caught up in a battle to debunk elitist and negative stereotypes relating to the type of school one attends. As expressed by the Task Force on Education Reform in 2004 and the Patterson Report in 2021, a dualized system of education has become entrenched in the social fabric of Jamaica and has functioned as the most powerful gatekeeper of the status quo. This dual education system manifests itself in diverse types of schools, especially at the secondary level, and this perpetuates a classist and elitist structure. Any reform to the education system must take this into consideration. No single program will change this. This requires a system change that will impact culture. For instance, traditional secondary schools are the schools of first choice for parents, for teachers, and students, as they are perceived to be offering better quality education. And here, I am by no means seeking to blame traditional high schools, not at all. They are seen as the most prestigious of secondary schools and the main purveyor of the elitist tradition of colonialism. The main deciding factor for which type of secondary school students attend is the scores they receive on the National Primary Exit Examination. And let me say, regardless of what we change the examination to be, if we do not change this aspect of the system, we will still continue to have the issues that we struggle with. Traditional secondary schools receive the students with the highest scores on their exit examination, while non-traditional secondary schools receive a mix of students who are literate and barely literate. And I'm not sure if many of you saw the program last night on CVM that was talking about the state of education in Jamaica, and some of these things were highlighted. Yes, we need to know, students, we need to know what's going on in our system. The system of placement, therefore, creates divide and competition among parents and students for spots in traditional secondary schools. Of the 253 secondary schools in Jamaica, 42 are traditional schools, which means that at any one time, a majority of the island students are competing for limited quality spaces. Stark disparities remain between the outcomes of traditional secondary schools and non-traditional secondary schools. The Patterson Report from the Education Transformation Commission of 2021, or National Education Inspectorate Report published 2015, or Education Task Force Report of 2004, all tell us that traditional secondary schools outperform non-traditional secondary schools, both in metrics of value added and performance in national examinations. This two-tiered system influences the outcomes of schooling and the social capital to which members of the society have access after secondary schooling. It communicates to students that those who attend particular types of schools are inferior or are superior. This is reflective of how the colonizers misused education to ensure power and wealth remained with the minority. So given the nature of each type of secondary school, one can argue that their context for teaching and learning will differ significantly. And your principal here knows that very well. For example, the types of socio-cultural challenges with which leaders and teachers in each type of school battle will differ. Depending on the type of school, some schools will struggle to support students in responding to many of the socio-cultural issues they face. And students who are here, this is the context within which you are going out to work. And you are called to something greater than yourself, so it is an important undertaking you have decided to join. The Education Transformation Commission report, which sometimes I refer to as the Pattison Report of 2021, states that Jamaica's tepid economic performance over the past half-century and its related chronic social problems can in good part be attributed to its learning crisis. This is essentially saying that our economic performance as a country is linked to the issues in the education sector. So our reality tells us that this current two-tiered education system is not working for us. Given the differences in the schooling system, it means a minority of the student population will have better access and a majority of students will be less prepared than others to contribute positively to the next level of learning and by extension, our society. Before I offer a suggestion on what we should do at this level, I want to take a brief look at what's happening at the tertiary level, and in particular, shed some light, not a lot, but a little on what's happening at the teacher preparation level. In charging the 2021 Pattison-led Education Transformation Commission, the Prime Minister, the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, noted that any attempt to propel Jamaica forward must place emphasis on the role of the tertiary sector as the research and innovation and the development of a flexible and creative thinking workforce will come from these institutions. So there's a strong belief by our Prime Minister that the tertiary sector has a lot to offer to the way forward. The Pattison report also noted that the lead universities of tertiary sector in Jamaica have produced women and men of the highest caliber, and that in particular to teacher education, Jamaica has a trained education workforce with most teachers having advanced education certification. That is something to celebrate. And of course, we know that most of them are migrating. According to the report from the Commission, the gap by socioeconomic level, gender, and geographic location persists at the tertiary level. We also know that male students living in rural areas, and students from socially and economically disadvantaged populations are less likely to access tertiary education. So let's bear this statement in mind that I'm projecting. What's happening here? What did you touch? Yes, thank you. So that statement on the slide I want you to think about, because this lecture is about stimulating thinking and possibly stimulating action. So let's look at why Shortwood Teachers College was established. Shortwood Teachers College was founded during pre-independent Jamaica. Let's imagine what life was like during 1885 for a majority of school-age children. It meant that though slavery was abolished, education was mainly for the wealthy, and a few blacks had the opportunity to pursue education beyond the elementary level. Do we know what means was used to pursue education at that time? 30 people across the island would be qualified for a scholarship to pursue the Jamaica local examination. 30 people in the entire Jamaica. So what did this mean? It meant that at that time, not many persons from regular, ordinary citizenship could pursue tertiary education. At the time when Shortwood was founded, of course, teaching was revered, and teaching was considered a very important profession. When Shortwood was established, it was established as part of the remit for social, economic, and political transformation in Jamaica. Shortwood Teachers College was established as one of the first fully funded teachers' colleges by the government. It was established to prepare a cadre of individuals who would influence the mind and the manner of young people, to shape them to assist with creating a new Jamaica, essentially what I call a new social order. Given the way in which Shortwood Teachers College has reformed itself over the years, and the significant contribution it has made to the education sector through its graduates, we can all say, well done, Shortwood Teachers College. As we celebrate Shortwood Teachers College's 140th year of existence, it is evident that we are standing on the shoulders of many, and as such, we should not take this for granted. This should propel us to take further steps in improving our preparation of teachers to influence the minds. As I further reflect on the reasons Shortwood Teachers College was established, the historical information on Shortwood Teachers College tell us that Shortwood saw its most rapid increase when the fee payment system for attending was abandoned. And you can check the records, I did not make it up. Meaning more people could afford to come to Shortwood because they did not have to pay a fee, and they would get meals, groceries, a place to live. Yes, exciting times. This meant more ordinary folks could attend Teachers College. Today, while fees at the teachers' colleges are still lower than many other institutions, it is no longer free to attend, and government funding is not as strong as it used to be. So while you bemoan, remember this. The Patterson report from the Education Transformation Commission notes that teachers' colleges in Jamaica struggle financially as they depend on a subvention from the government to cover salaries and student tuition, to cover operational costs and pursue infrastructural development, and of course to fulfill other needs. Another issue that we face in 2024 is that teachers' colleges are struggling to attract students to enter. The Patterson-led Education Transformation Commission noted that restoring the centrality of the role of teachers to a successful education system is critical for how teachers are perceived by the community, but also to their own self-confidence. Indeed, it is important that we allow teachers to know that they are valued. In other words, we must return to a place where we make teachers know and feel that they are valued as a critical component of the human resources needed to fuel development as a nation. Next slide, because I think this is no longer working. Oftentimes we think that when it comes to teachers, it's only the monetary contribution that will make them feel valued. While money is important, and I know that very well, right? It is important that our speech, our actions, and the way we make teachers feel when they are in our presence, that we pay attention to that. While the role of the government is important in communicating value to teachers, those who lead institutions of learning must lead by example by allowing their actions, speech, and disposition to communicate to teachers that they are valued. From a sample of 45 teachers who migrated from Jamaica to teach abroad, Thompson, one of my colleagues, and some other colleagues in their study published in 2023, found that of the 10 factors driving teacher migration, one of the top 4 was the quality of leadership and management and working conditions. Essentially saying it's not just the money why people are going away. It's also about how we lead in the institutions and how we make them feel as teachers in these institutions. So raising teachers' wages alone, while that is important, raising teachers' wages alone will not solve the problem. I just want to put that in there. So I went that long road to explain some of our socio-historical context, because if we are to reform effectively, we must understand the dynamics involved. We must also understand that change in one aspect of the education system will affect change in another aspect, or will affect another aspect of the system. So in reforming, we must make our very best, or try our very best attempt to look at the whole system. At this juncture of the lecture, I would like to be more deliberate and offer 2 solutions on what I think we could do. I want to also say that the suggestions that I'm offering will be based on these principles. And I use these as guiding principles if we are to reform using authentic experiences. So let's look at how we investigate, study, and document, and use the lessons from the models of the best practices in our education system. Let's also create more opportunities for experiential learning for teachers, for leaders, for education officers, for teacher educators, etc. Let's also see how we can use the technology to create immersive experiences. Let's involve community stakeholders, collaborate within and across sectors. We also need to think about flexibility in our curriculum, interdisciplinarity. Let us look within and across disciplines. Let's also look at our assessments. Oftentimes we pay so much attention to the traditional assessments, but let's look how best we can incorporate authentic assessments, or assessments by performance, assessments that require real-world application. Opportunities for reflection on the system is another principle that we need to use to guide our reform efforts, and ongoing professional development, monitoring and evaluation. And lastly, another guiding principle for countries that were once colonized. This also means continuing the decolonization project. This is an ongoing process for all of us, not some of us, all of us. So with these guiding principles then, here are the 2 areas of deliberate focus. And I'm closing, just bear with me. In sharing these suggestions, I'm also implying that if we are to reform using authentic experiences, it means we are saying that we need a new social order. And that is why I asked the question, are you ready? So to create this new social order, my first suggestion is that we address the inequities that continue to strengthen the 2-tiered education system, particularly at the secondary level of schooling. Though every Jamaican child has the opportunity to attend school, it is important that they are given the opportunity to attend quality schools. Further improvements are needed to the placement structure. To be more explicit, I am recommending that we send more students with lower scores to what we call the traditional high schools, instead of the approach that we now use, where most of the students with the high scores end up in the traditional high schools. And yes, that is bold. It requires a cultural shift. And I see the education representative smiling, because that is not easy. But if we say we want to reform using authentic experiences, then these are some of the things that we must do, because the data is telling us that it's not working for us. We also need to improve the spaces that we have in the other institutions so that they become quality spaces. In the short term, I'm also suggesting that another thing that we can do is to partner with the churches. There are churches where their population has got smaller, and I know many of them. And they have land, and they have buildings that are in good conditions. Here is where we perhaps could repurpose some of these buildings, so that while we wait for the funding to build more schools, we're also using opportunities that are available to build to provide quality spaces. So the question to Shortwood Teachers College leadership, from the board chairman to the principal to the heads of departments to the program leaders to the alumni leaders and so on. How could Shortwood Teachers College help to lead such actions to help influence what happens at that level? Further, to address the inequities caused by the two-tiered education system, I'm also asking us to pay attention to how we speak about what's happening in our schools or what's happening in our education system. For example, Chung et al. In 2021 note that within many of our Jamaican education policy documents and from the voices of many of our education stakeholders, we often speak of providing work-ready graduates and preparing students to pass standardized tests so that they can matriculate to the next level of learning or to the world of work. But Brissett notes that while such rhetoric is often aimed at reducing inequities and underachievement, they often result in the unintended consequences of promoting domination and exclusion. So let's give attention to when we talk about preparing work-ready graduates, preparing students to pass CSEC or to pass PEP, as the case may be. Let's pay attention to how we talk about those things. Because oftentimes those ways of speaking neglect the contextual peculiarities that we must address if we are to reform the system properly. Reforming using authentic experiences will also require out-of-norm actions. And so I come back to, if we increase the number of students who are barely literate and who can barely manage to some of the traditional schools, it also means that we're offering to more students quality spaces so they know what quality schools look like while we take the other actions. That's a bold and that's an out-of-norm action. I want to hasten to talk about the second recommendation, which is to re-examine how we recruit for teacher preparation and how we educate our teachers. Shortwood Teachers College knows how to transform itself because it has had transformation in buildings, program offerings, leadership, female principal, male principal, female students to male students, uniform to, or no uniform to uniform. Yes, there was a time when we didn't wear uniform. I would like to use this opportunity to challenge Shortwood, given your excellent way of reforming and the partnerships that you have locally and internationally. I want you to reflect on this briefly with me. What have you done with the experiences from the preliminary programs you used to offer? Or what some people may call the bridging year program. Anybody remembers that program? Mr. Clark and Dr. Dawkins should recall those programs. What lessons did you learn from taking in students who did not quite fit the matriculation bill and equipping them with the relevant training to make them ready for the first year of the teacher preparation program? We abandoned that system because we had an influx of persons wanting to attend Teachers College. We also changed from diploma to degree, to bachelor's degree. We said that we wanted to attract the brightest and the best, among the fact that there were some other institutions that existed that could meet the needs of those students. These were arguments that were raised at the time to abandon the preliminary year system for teacher preparation. And while these arguments are not bad in and of themselves, let's return to look at the lessons from our experiences with students who entered through that system. Is it perhaps time to return to a structure like that, given the challenges we are having with recruitment? The data from our reality tells us tell us that though there is expanded access, fewer students are exiting secondary schools with the requisite qualification. And over 21 institutions are competing for these few students, not to mention those who will go overseas to study, and nothing is wrong with that. We also know that these few students have several options. We also know that many of these students are not interested in the teaching profession. We also know that many of these students will come because the fee is cheaper, and I'm not knocking anybody. And even when they come, they tell us that they are not planning to teach, and that's okay. However, I think the time has come for us to re-examine our recruitment strategy. So what about us returning to lessons from the past to inform our recruitment strategy? How about us returning to a bridging year by selecting a pool of those who are deemed to have not met the normal matriculation requirements, not the brightest, as we may say. And I would also like to point out that arguments about not the brightest also do not make room for students who are late bloomers, because some of us are late bloomers. So we need to pay attention to how we talk about attracting bright students, because we need to give everyone a chance. What about preparing them for a year so that they can then enter? And I'm sure, I can guarantee you that you will find in that group of persons individuals who are willing and ready to grab at any opportunity. Individuals who have natural talents and giftings, and individuals who may stay longer in the profession as well. I recall the year I arrived at Shortwood, a beneficiary of the preliminary program. And I can tell you there were several others like myself. I came to Shortwood wanting to pursue home economics, but one of the prerequisites at that time was that I needed to have chemistry, and I had failed chemistry and mathematics. So my preliminary year was spent pursuing mathematics, chemistry, and I also chose another home economics subject. I think it was home economics management at the time. And there were several other students like me, some wanting to do primary education, early childhood education, and various secondary specializations. We were taken in for the year and we lived on campus. This meant we were away from distractions so we could focus on our studies. As part of our preliminary program, we also did personal development, which entailed learning about certain etiquette. And that's important. The principal spoke about the holistic sort of education that we need to provide. That's a critical part of it. The focus when we were here was not just on content to pass for the different subjects to enter year one. It was a fully fledged learning experience with introduction to a new way of life. Many of us today, when we meet, we laugh and talk about all the things that we had to change as individuals. Time is against me, so I won't share any stories about that. Enrollments are low right now across the teachers' colleges. That's a fact. We're happy to see so many students here. And though there are scholarships, these scholarships are for the most part for those who have met the matriculation requirements. So they still target the few. If enrollment numbers in the teachers' colleges continue to remain low, who will educate our children? And if I may say, who will educate my grandchildren? So the onus is on all of us who are here, students, lecturers, friends, to pass on the message to others who have not yet entered to be prepared for teaching. I know the program that I'm suggesting, we will hear the cry about funding. But what about partnerships to fund an opportunity like this with our government, international partners, and the private sector? Let me also add that in preparing teachers, we are not just preparing people to teach in the classrooms. We are preparing individuals for a society. Organizations outside of school are always happy to have teachers because of the skill set that they come with. Teachers also serve at different levels of the education system. So we also need to broaden our thinking to understand that when we recruit and prepare teachers, we are not just preparing them to remain inside a classroom. The data from our experiences of working in schools and interacting as members of the society are also showing that more students have social problems. So it means more of those who we will recruit and who we have recruited for teacher preparation will have more social problems. In addition to the social problems experienced outside of school, they also come with trauma caused by those who educated them within schools. We must also remember that as teachers, we are the sum total of our personal and professional experiences. So our recruitment strategy must go hand in hand with our program delivery strategies. Let me just share a brief excerpt from a book that I published entitled The Lived Curriculum Experiences of Jamaican Teachers, Career and Decolonizing Intentions. And this is really not a shameless plug, but it's available on the internet, so you can purchase it or read it if you so desire. I'm sharing an excerpt from Anna, and Anna wrote this. Anna stated, "Even though I know that teaching is my calling, in retrospect, my decision to become a teacher was for all the wrong reasons. I wanted to be feared. I wanted to be the giver of knowledge, and I wanted to determine the future of my charges, as my teachers have done to me, in deciding where the bright ones and where the dull ones go." End of quote. And this was Anna writing after spending many years teaching in the education system. This is just one example, and I'm sure many of us have examples or narratives that we could share. So our course and program delivery strategies must provide opportunities for unpacking these experiences and the assumptions students hold because of these experiences. We must take a holistic approach by creating opportunities for students to wrestle with their social realities. And as teacher educators, we also need to engage in collegial opportunities and ongoing professional development to unpack our own trauma caused by our own social realities so that we do not pass them on to our students. If we are to reform using authentic experiences, then we must create room for unpacking these experiences. Another consideration in how we educate teachers is this: what lessons have we learned from those we have graduated and who are working in our schools? How do we use their stories to help shape what we do and how we prepare teachers at Shortwood Teachers College? The data from the Jamaican reality tell us that few schools have resources that teachers need to help them be successful. How then do we use this information in our courses and programs to prepare our students to become teacher leaders? And what do I mean by becoming a teacher leader? And while we have the students here, this is important for you to think about as well. Am I a teacher leader given these characteristics? How can I better prepare myself to become a teacher leader if I'm not a teacher leader? So in a book I published on teacher leadership with two other colleagues, and the book is on the slide, it's called A Cross-Cultural Consideration of Teacher Leaders' Narratives of Power, Agency, and School Culture. In it, we discovered some characteristics that were common of teachers who were considered to be teacher leaders. And these were not teachers who were ascribed any roles in their schools. They were mainly doing their job of being a classroom teacher. And you will see the characteristics on the next slide. How do we prepare our students to be zealous, to think about the teaching profession and how it can contribute to a purpose that is bigger than themselves? How do we prepare them to be resourceful so they know how to use human and material resources to address identified needs regardless of the circumstances in which they work? How do we prepare them to be eager, to teach them to be curious enough so they engage in self-directed, ongoing professional development and networking opportunities that they could improve their capacity to aid their learners in their institutions? Another characteristic is self-evaluative. This means preparing our teachers to constantly critique themselves, to sharpen their skills, helping them to understand their role and what they need to be in meeting the needs of the students they are serving or the needs of the institution. And the last characteristic there of a teacher leader is solutions-oriented, which says that regardless of what's happening in my circumstance, regardless of what's happening in my situation, I need to be agentic without being prompted by anyone. How can I learn to be solution-oriented, to solve the problems that I face, to innovate and come up with new ideas? And so those of us who prepare must lead by examples. To help develop these skills, we must take time to listen to the stories that the students come with. And the students must also take time to listen to the stories of each other. Let us also engage in research to experiment with ideas. I know many times both students and colleagues are afraid of doing research, but research is really about testing out ideas that you come up with. So students, as you're engaging in your research, how can you experiment with knowledge to help solve some of the situations that we face? Let's use strategies that will help our students engage with real issues. Let me just say that while some multiple choice questions are important, multiple choice questions alone will not achieve this desire. So we need more performance assessment, or what we call authentic assessments. And I am sure some of us are doing this, but it simply suggests, given the data we are seeing, that more of us need to do that. So those of us who are being prepared, when we get out there, we need to do more of that. Those of us who are educating and preparing those who are here, we need to do more than that. So this is not easy. But for those of us who are leaders at different levels in the education system, and in particular preparing teachers, must also undergo ongoing professional development to equip self. I think one of the things I will just share here, while I know I'm watching the time, is that while I was at Shortwood, I engaged in an assessment activity as a home economics student. But that activity also had students who were specializing in double English, social studies, and visual arts at the time. And what we did, we hosted an evening event, and this was our grading. So those who did clothing and textiles, they had to produce the garment. Those who did food and nutrition had to prepare the meal. We had to learn how to do vote of thanks, give toast, seat our guests, and that was all part of the grading. And those things have remained with me up to this point. See how I remember it like it was yesterday? It was held on the lawn. So cross-disciplinary collaboration is also important in what we need to do to reform using authentic experiences. We must have meaningful collaboration. So perhaps we can start with mapping our curriculum within disciplines and then across disciplines, or mapping the roles we play within teacher education departments of individual institutions, and then across departments and perhaps across institutions even. Mapping will help us to identify gaps, misalignment, and repetition, and from this discern what we need to do to influence the intellectual, moral, spiritual, and social development of individuals. Let's be honest, this is hard work. Meaning collaboration is hard work, but we have no choice, because our Jamaica's Vision 2030 indicate that by 2030, Jamaica intends to achieve developed country status through the provision of a world-class education system. And we would have heard our Prime Minister the other day saying that we are facing challenges in meeting this target. But one of the things that he did say is that we must continue to persevere to ensure Jamaica's development to first world status. So whether it is 2030 or beyond, this is a call to action for all of us. A transformed education sector is critical to development as a first world nation. One of our professors, and he spoke at one of your previous lectures, Professor Errol Miller, argued that there is a strong and close relationship between schooling, teachers, and the structure of society. He contends that the transformation of the society is linked to the transformation of teachers. So like it or not, our mission is a societal one once we enter the profession of educating. Our preparation of teachers must help them believe that they too can influence change for the better. And I hope that out of this lecture, the students who are here will also come away thinking that you too can influence change for the better. It needs all of us, not just some of us. Reforming education through authentic experiences aims to achieve a more socially just education. Achieving a more socially just education requires collaboration and partnerships among those who are conscious of the disparities that exist within the Jamaican society and their role in helping to reduce the negative impacts. It requires an all-hands-on-deck approach. What we normally say, me in my small corner and you in, where are the people? Right. So me in my small corner and you in yours. Partnerships among various entities, private and public, local and international. And so as I'm closing, earlier I mentioned a quote from our current Prime Minister. And now I want to leave us with a quote from one of our former prime ministers, who was writing at a time when Jamaica needed a new social order. He noted that at a time when a transformation of society is needed, the teacher must carry the brunt of the burden. But for this to happen, the teacher must first undergo a process of self-transformation. It means that it begins with me, or if you want to say it begins with I and I. His quote was targeting teachers, but note that the quote was targeting teachers in the broadest sense of the word. So whether you work at the university, in regular high school, primary, early childhood, it's for all of us. Whether you work at the Ministry of Education, it's for you as well. So using this as my backdrop, I will close with a question, finally. And the question is this: whatever your role in the education sector, are you ready to undergo this process of self-transformation? A process of self-transformation is the first step to reform our education system using authentic experiences. If you are not ready, it's time to make yourself ready. We need each other. Let's do this together. Thank you.
So, Professor Roof have given us a lot to consider. It's more than a mouthful. All right, but now we'll have our question and answer section. We're just giving her some time to cool off a bit and have something to drink. So, my shorted heights, just have your question based on the that wealth of information that you have gotten about authentic experience. We may need an additional mic for Professor Roof, and one supposed to be on the floor. So one will be there. We may need an additional one if we have any more.
I have.
All right, so Dr. Will?
Yes, I have a question. And seemingly most of the questions you've asked, the answers have already been provided, I gather, based on what you've shared. But I'm concerned about the triad partnership, the church, the school, and community. And particularly for those communities within the deep rural areas, and in some cases, the inner cities. I want to ask, how will we bridge the gap for the immersive experiential experiences with the technology when some of these areas do not have electricity, students or parents cannot afford the devices, and the fact that our world and our society is technologically driven? How shall we proceed or attempt to bridge that gap when we really ourselves cannot provide the technology?
Thank you for that question. I imagined that question when I was preparing about the technology, not so much about the partnership. But we have both modern and old technology. I remember being part of a program where we used to teach using radio. And I'm not remembering the name of the device at the time, but the radio system was set up at a church. And people from the community, and these were persons pursuing higher education at the time, would go to the church to talk through the microphones that are set up in there, and lecturers would travel down to meet with these students as well. In rural communities, we have churches where we host evangelism meeting, regardless of the fact that we do not have electricity or internet. So perhaps we need to return to some of those things that we used to do, to have town criers supporting us. Yes, it may sound like it's, well, not like, it's old technology. It's not everything that the modern technology is going to be able to facilitate for the very reasons that you have mentioned. But it also lends us to being creative. How about designing packages, pre-packaged workbooks? We used to do these things in the past. We used to have correspondence, people pursuing masters and doctorates using some of those ways and means. So I think it is suggesting to us that until we get to the place where we have running water in every community and electricity in every community, we continue to use some of the old technology to drive the improvements that we need. I think for me, I always say, start with what you have. And I think that is what we are being called to. And I think the Prime Minister is also calling us to that, knowing that as a country, and we need to remember that we are a young society. As a country, we do not have the funding. We will never have the funding to provide all we need in the time we need it. But the data is suggesting to us that we are at a crisis point. And so we need to go back to some of the old things to help us and help us move forward. I hope that will help as well.
All right. Go ahead with your question, Dr. Messias.
Good afternoon. Dr. Roof, you mentioned something about our recruitment practices must match, or is it program offerings? I would like you to elaborate on that. Oh, right. Can you elaborate on that?
Delivery strategy. So if you recall the example, oh sorry, thank you for that question. So if you recall the example I shared about the bridging program, right? That's part of recruitment. We already know that all the institutions are competing for the very few students who are said to be qualified, right? We are now lamenting that the SEC passes are not what they are supposed to be. We lament also about the primary level, but I did not spend much time on that. So if we're able to recruit from the pool of people who we say we do not yet meet the matriculation requirements and put them through a program to upskill them, to equip them with the qualification that they need to get in. And I'm not talking about either the associate program offered by the government. It means that if we bring in that group of students, we are going to need to find new ways of educating them. So certain things we cannot take for granted. We need to educate them, to teach them a new way of life, to teach them how to build confidence in themselves as well. And this is going to be, this will need to happen in the way we teach. So we need to have more dialogue, more conversations, not just group work for completing group work, but also how do we get them to unpack some of the things that they are experiencing? How do we get them to participate, to collaborate in another specialization from the one that they're in? And so that's what I meant when I talk about our delivery. Our delivery, of course, goes with our assessment. So many of them will not be able to do well on the multiple choice questions or even on the essay type questions. But we then need to backtrack and help them, perhaps with the reading skills that they need, or just the values that they need to display. So our jobs become more difficult, and not because we are no longer having what we consider to be the normal route for matriculation. So when we assess, how can we then help them through these other ways that come naturally to students, and get them and grade them as well as part of that? So I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, I take your point, because that, for me, that is very applicable in terms of scaffolding, building capacity in a student that might have matriculated but somehow has some deficiencies. But when it comes to those students persons who are taken in who are not matriculating, for me it's going to take a policy shift at the MOE level, where we go back to, we mentioned the preliminary year program, because as it stands now, we may take in a few that don't matriculate because they might need the math if it is not part of the requirement. Like our early childhood and primary students must have the math, but other students can pick it up after. But if we're talking about persons who do not matriculate fully, then for me it's going to take a policy shift again with the government for us to go back to that preliminary year program.
Just to say as well that we are leaders in the system. Shortwood is a leader in the system, and so perhaps the Ministry of Education has not yet considered that, but given what's happening in the context, we do not have many students who will come to the teachers' colleges, and the numbers will continue to decline. And so if we need people to influence the minds, and that's the purpose of a teacher, to influence the mind for the kind of society that we need, then we must begin with the teacher training. And if we're not graduating the people with the qualification, then we need to do something to help them until we get to the point where we fix the other levels with the issues that we are facing.
Thank you.
All right, before we go to the next question, I myself have a question here. So I'm going to take your question next, sir. All right. And so the question I'm asking is, Professor Roof, you spoke a lot about two-tier system that we have in Jamaica, especially at the secondary level. Is there a correlation between performance and socioeconomic background? And what are some of the factors that would cause that correlation?
That is definitely evident, because what you find in the two-tiered system is that the students who are from the middle to upper class tend to go to the traditional schools. And we can trace that back to when the secondary schools were established and the different types of schools that were established and how they were set up and who they were set up to serve. So though we have, one or two students from lower income families attending traditional high schools, a majority of those students who you find in the traditional high schools tend to be from the middle upper. In the non-traditional high schools, what you find are mainly the students who are from the lower income socioeconomic status in our country. And one of the factors linked to that is the fact that oftentimes parents who are in higher income brackets are able to provide the other support that their children need that is not being provided through the schools. And so the lower income families depend on the school to provide the kind of support, but schools themselves are under-resourced and are not able to meet some of those needs. So yes, there is a correlation, and that's part of what we need to change as well, so that we have a broader spread of people in these various types of schools. Yeah.
Interesting. All right, go ahead, sir, with your question.
Excellent presentation,
Thank you.
Professor Roof. But I have two very simple questions. One, how do we strengthen the early childhood education system so that we can ensure that we create better bases on which to build? And secondly, how do we attract more men to the classroom?
Thank you very much. Those are not two simple questions, but I will attempt to offer a response. Firstly, when it comes to the early childhood level, I think our country has been on a path to reform the early childhood sector. And we have made several attempts in terms of getting more trained teachers into early childhood schools. And the government is still, working at that, because we need more trained persons, but funding is also part of that. But I want to also say, it is not just early childhood. We have to reform at every level, because while we are fixing early childhood, then the other students are going through the system. So I really want for us to think about the system as a whole. There's something, I will not share all the details related to it, but I will say this. There was a program that we had, I think it was led by UNICEF, and that program sought to go into communities to assist parents of children from they were born, I think from birth to the time when they were supposed to be in early childhood institutions, to support them with the information that they need to care for, their children. That program, I think, happened mainly in rural areas, and we have not continued it. So I think programs like those we have to revisit, because parents need support, particularly those parents who are from the lower income brackets. They need the support so they understand that from the child is born, you need to provide, that sort of support to help the child. To the other area that you mentioned, how do we attract more males in the system? I think males tend to look at funding. Yeah? Men like to know that they're able to provide for their families. And if we're honest, we understand that the teaching profession is not attractive to several males because there's a perception that they will not be able to provide properly or adequately for their families. Increasing the wages or the salaries may help, and that's a big part, but it also, I think there's also room for us to offer mentorship. The men who are in the profession, perhaps now is a time for us to have targeted mentorship. Dr. Clark and Dr. Dawkins, who are two stalwarts who have been in the profession for a while, find a group, you know, somewhere and target them and say, come to Shortwood next year, we are preparing you for Shortwood, and share their stories that it's not so bad. You can survive. You can meet the needs of your family as well. Because you have met the needs of your families through teaching. So perhaps I'm suggesting an alternative way other than the formal way, which is about, you know, one-on-one community dialogue and mentoring, targeted mentoring approach to get more men in the profession. I want to also add quickly that we perhaps need to use this selling point too. The men who are in the profession tend to do so very well. They're always in positions of leadership. Maybe that's linked to our patriarchal system. Yes, but that's maybe for our next lecture. But we could, you know, make them aware that many of the males who are in the profession are also leaders in the system. Yeah.
All right, before I take Dr. Williams, I encourage my Shortwoodites, the students, to ask a few. We can take a few. The time is going, but, you know, I'm encouraging you to ask a few questions. Go ahead, Dr. Williams.
My concern is, as we are repositioning for the future, the landscape is currently shifting, because whilst you're asking of us, and we have been bearing the brunt of the burden, it is more so the students or the populace out there coming in that really is informing us what exactly we need to be doing. And why am I saying this? Because when it comes onto the recruitment, the students who are likely to come in are saying, we don't want a 4-year nor 3-year education. We are about earning. What is it there for as for their earning power? And if we do come in, what is going to sustain us? Because there isn't anything to sustain, there's not much to sustain them. And you have identified the socio-economic background, and we know what that is. So their parents do not know anything about financial literacy. It's those coming in now and the current high school system that you have something that somehow prepares them to understand that. So the parents say to them, you're 18, you're on your own, find your way. What do we do?
So I guess we are applauding because we don't want a 4-year degree. Is that why we're applauding? Because I think we move to, and we need to pay attention to the fact that the 4-year degree is not just a Jamaican situation, you know, because some of our students, when they go abroad, if they only do 3 years, some institutions put them back through another year to make up for the 4-year. So you're already ahead of the game if you are doing a 4-year degree. Let me also add that in. The students are coming in with not wanting to, you say, stay for a long time. Perhaps that requires a policy shift for us to return to shorter, the 3-year, at that time it was diploma. I think we'll have to look at the national qualifications framework, which we are putting forward as a country, to see whether or not the framework will allow for lesser years. But I think we have a responsibility to influence minds. This is our responsibility. So the students come in this way because this is what they have been exposed to. What's our responsibility when they come here to help them understand differently?
It is difficult, but we have to influence the minds to say, yes, you may want to go to work, no. But look at the long-term benefits for remaining, for staying, for pursuing your education. We also perhaps need to partner with other sectors to see how we can provide opportunities for them while they're studying to work and earn. And perhaps those are programs that, you know, we could align ourselves with organizations that do that. But to just say that we want to just adhere to what they are suggesting, I think we're the leaders, and yes, while we're open to change, we also need to influence their minds, because we also know what's better for them and what the longer term effects are. So it's a balancing and a combination of listening to their voices and adding the years of experience and the wisdom about what we know down the road to help inform them.
All right, as Dr. Clark come, I want just to, I'm going to let you answer your questions first. All right, we're still looking for one from the student body. We at least need a question, but Dr. Clark, go ahead. No.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Professor Roof.
Yes, sir.
Let me start with a little speech. And for those of us who have watched your growth over the years, since you first came through the gates of Shortwood, and have been privileged to see your advancement. And I must confess that I didn't know you had achieved the professorship. We would like to congratulate you this evening. Yeah. You have opened a discussion and a number of issues coming up. In some way, you have opened a can of worms, because this business of education is more than just about resources. And I'll say this, because you spoke to it in your presentation. I entered teaching, talking about what has kept us. I entered teaching in 1976. It was a year of political fervor. But it was a time when a number of us young men, and a number of young men, entered the profession at 1A Mariska Road at the time. Not 77 Shortwood Road. 1A Mariska Road. A number of us young men entered. And what drew us and what kept me was the idea, not so much, God knows, I wasn't even thinking about salary. Because I bought into a vision of Jamaica where the teacher was seen as the liberator. So it was more about, it was teaching literacy, basic literacy, because remember there was a big literacy drive at the time. So it was teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic, yeah, for liberation, not so much for the earning power that came after. And one of the most impactful course for me during my preparation was a course called History of Education. In that course, I learned about the social structure of our society, the very thing to which you spoke. I learned about the history of education and how it had enabled the maintenance of a status quo that was inimical to the development of Jamaica. And so we all bought into that and said, we want to be part of that movement that was going to make a difference. We didn't use the word reformation or reform. We said transformation, which for me is a much stronger word than reform. Reform for me sounds like a little tinker here, tinker there. Transformation is radical change. And I think currently, Jamaica needs to wrap up what we have, with due respect to the ministry rep that we have here. Wrap up what we have, put it one side and start again. I'll say one last thing, Doc, Prof, and you can respond to all of them. One last thing, which it has been a sore point for me ever since I realized what was going on. The way we assess. And you spoke about authentic assessment, and I believe in authentic assessment 100%. I do. But authentic assessment cannot be used to determine who gets those coveted places that you spoke about in those, 21 schools, something like that? Whatever the number, 42. Whatever the number, yeah. You can't do that. And so, what I learned is that what gets tested is what gets taught. And so we begin to see what was supposed to be an exit profile assessment as an exam. So we talk about who passed PEP and who failed PEP. It's the primary exit profile. Each child moving from primary to secondary with a profile of what he or she can do, and the teachers at that level now use that, Miss Malloy, to help them to move up. Right? What we're doing now is using these assessments to promote the best and dump the rest. That's what we're doing. So I am ready, Professor, even at this old age, to join a movement that truly is going to, not reform, but transform education in Jamaica. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for that, Dr. Clark. I think as an individual, I had hopes when we had the Prime Minister announce the Transformation Commission. I thought that we were ready for this transformation. But then as I look at the recommendations, and there are several recommendations, and pay attention to the implementation of those recommendations, I realize that we are not ready. And I think we're not ready because more of us want to maintain the status quo. And until we begin to face ourselves, it's only the few that will continue to drive that. So more of us need to undergo this self-conversation, to talk about, why do I support this? Why do I jump for this school or that school? How do I respond to my friend if my friend is from so-and-so school? So it begins with us, and I agree with you. It's a hard thing to do. It's not easy, but we have to start somewhere. And I'm going to come back to the fact that it starts with teachers who understand that this profession is about something bigger than self. It's about nation building. And I think that is what we all need to log on to.
All right, we'll take one more.
Dr. Carmel, I just want to commend you on your academic progress. And we're proud of you at Shortwood Teachers College. You have done extremely well in terms of your publication and scholarly work. And you have given us many ideas. But as you have rightly said, the education system is very complex. But I believe wherever there is a problem, there is a solution.
Yes.
And some solutions are situational, contextual, and require a nuance of how to deal with it in a particular way. Sometimes generalized solutions don't necessarily work.
Definitely.
I want to go back, and this is a comment I'm making. I want to go back to the idea of assessment. I think Jamaica has done well in terms of curriculum development and implementation of curriculum. What has hurt us many times is when projects are completed, those projects don't result in systemic changes in the education system. Sometimes the project funding, the innovations and the changes stop when the project stops. Look at the reform of secondary school. I was involved in the writing of the maths curriculum. It was intended to be an integrated curriculum, integrated in terms of integration across topics, using thematic approaches, integration across subject areas, right? And project-based learning is not new. Constructivist methodology is not new. Authentic cooperative learning that make use of mixability and the learning of social skills, right, were embedded in that particular document and curriculum. They had rose traders going across Jamaica, but it's dead now. Do you realize that? And even us at the college now, we're doing a degree. The international standard for a bachelor's degree, I think, is a minimum of 120 credits. But we are doing at least 135 credits, and in some programs, 138 credits. If a student is doing 18 credits per semester, and for 15 hours of teaching, there is one assessment, it means that the students have at least 12 to 18 assignments. And so I have been advocating for changes and for revisiting that curriculum program, because the students are more caught up with completing assignments than learning. Assessment is for learning. Yeah, and guys, I know I was in a very influential position. I serve as chair of the curriculum committee for TCJ, so I am not innocent completely. So when you clap me, I want you to know that I've sinned, but we have the chance to redeem ourselves, right? So this is something that I want us to look at to see whether we could have assessment across courses. We started that. Chris Clark, a great educator, when he was VP for academics, started that in terms of looking across different courses to see what are the common skills that could be assessed across courses. More project-based learning and more integrated learning for authentic learning in real work situations, and for us to really make learning enjoyable, meaningful, practical, and authentic. And I'm hoping that my comments will engender some kind of interest towards solving that particular problem. One comment. In terms of assessment, I know we're guided by the normal distribution. The normal distribution is based on a philosophy that people are different, meaning that not everyone will be able to get that optimal achievement level in terms of percentage. It's not negatively skewed, right? It's a bell-shaped curve. And I think to a large extent our assessment tends to remain that way, that it is segregated. Not segregated, it's stratified, meaning that, so if a course is taught and everybody gets an A, right, there is the thinking that the assessment was too easy or something was wrong with the quality of the assessment. And we probably need to change our thinking to have more performance-based assessment rather than these summative assessment that are paper-based.
Thank you, Dr. Clark. Dr. George Dawkins. Wow, I think the brain is getting tired. Thank you, Dr. Dawkins, and also Dr. Clark. I think to co-join what you said with something Dr. Clark mentioned, we have come a far way with the assessment at the primary level, right? The intentions of the assessments are always about placement when they are designed. However, because of the few quality spaces at the secondary level, we always end up back in the situation where the assessments are used to decide who goes over here, who is brighter, who is slower, and so on. So until we get to the point where we have more quality spaces, we will continue to struggle with the assessment at the end of grade 6. You mentioned, Dr. Dawkins, the issue of projectization that we have in education. And you said we are okay with implementation, but I think we have an implementation issue. In that, when we develop these novel ideas, I'm in curriculum, right? And I was blessed enough to have the curriculum documents from the days of Manley, the 1970s. From that time until now, we have been using integrated design. When you read the documents, they all talk about integrated design, which is connected to the constructivist ideology. But when it gets to the point of implementation, we have challenges. The teachers are not given enough time to engage with the new ideas. The training is inadequate. The training at the school level is also inadequate. So we use this one-size-fits-all approach. And so that approach ignores contextual peculiarities. So we have to revisit how we implement the ideas when we come up with them. I think the projectization is also because the funding oftentimes is not sustained. And so we need to look at, if we're not going to sustain funding for a particular thing, how can we still get it to work in the system? But to do that, we also have to monitor, we also have to evaluate, and we also have to have the data for that. And I think we fall short of having the data relating to monitoring and evaluation in our system to drive the changes. I think my suggestion for us here at Shortwood is a suggestion I shared in my speech about the authentic assessments. Let's look at mapping our curriculum within the departments and across the departments to see where we have gaps or where we have similarities, or perhaps where we have repetition, you know, or misalignments, etc. And I think that will help to reduce the number of assignments, because the assignments are really supposed to be the application of the learning. It's not just to get a score. So if we collaborate more meaningfully within and across the departments, perhaps we can then have, you know, a situation whereby one activity or one task is being used to assess a range of things. And I shared the example of my experience being here when something like that was done as a home economics student. It involved students were the lecturers who were in language, visual arts, and so on. But we must be willing as well to do that. There has to be a will. It's not just the resources, the will, the motivation, and the valuing of the fact that we are all contributing to nation building, something bigger than ourselves.
All right, thank you, thank you, Professor Rue, for that. As we wrap up, I'm going to wrap up with a simple question which I want you to probably answer quickly, and then I'm going to finish. But this is a burning question I have. We are living in unprecedented times, and we see a situation where you mentioned bridging the gap, but we see a situation where the government even move away the fees for the art NTA, and they still report a low take-up. One of our faculty that offers scholarship, maths and science, is one of our lowest faculty. To help us here understand what is really happening in the society.
So I spoke about the fact that the institutions are competing for the few students, and especially when you talk about math and science, and we're saying we want people to come who have the CAPE and the CSEC, that's even a smaller pool. There was some data shared by Capri recently about the interest level of the people on the corner. and not being motivated to pursue education. And one of the things that they said is that it requires a targeted approach by visiting communities and spending time in the communities to influence the minds of those who are there so that they can see the benefits. Professor Vaughns did a study, and in that study she was targeting parents of early childhood children. And one of the things that she discovered is that many of the parents didn't have an interest in education. So we have all of these social issues which suggest that we need a new social order. We need a society to be transformed. And those of us who are involved now, government, individual, we have to help influence that kind of change. You only need to take a look on TikTok or Instagram to see some of the things. So we can't give up, we can't throw up our hands in the air and do nothing. The students who are here being prepared for the teaching profession must understand that they are being prepared for a purpose bigger than themselves. And whether you like it or not, you are being prepared as an influencer. And we often take the position that, oh, but the parents influence them more, or the musicians influence them more. But we do influence the students. So we have to look at ourselves, think about what we can do, what can I do, while we lament all these things. Because there are many good things that are happening in our country. And so we have to find those positives as well, celebrate them, and make ourselves available for being an important part of the change that we need in our society.
All right, so that is well said, Professor. We'll invite our Year 2 President to come forward as Colleen McBean to present our token to our presenter today. You can put your hands together.
Good evening, everyone. Dr. Carmel Roof, on behalf of Shortwood Teachers College, I would like to extend this token of our appreciation for your kind and motivational words. You are an inspiration. Thank you.
All right. Yes. So as I look at the vote of thanks and offer that, it is with heart full of gratitude that I stand before you as we draw the curtain on what has been an enlightening presentation by Professor Roof, who lectured on reforming education through authentic experience. We have navigated the vast sea of knowledge and docked at the shore of understanding, guided by the torch of our esteemed speaker, Professor Carmel Roof. Her insights have illuminated the path towards an educational renaissance where learning is not just absorbed but lived. We extend our sincere thanks to Professor Roof for her invaluable contribution. To our esteemed guests, your presence has been the cornerstone of this lecture success. Your engagement and thoughtful discourse have not only enriched and the conversation, but have also sown the seeds for the collaboration and future good. So thank you for your contribution, Dr. Dawkins and Dr. Clark for those questions. Our gratitude also goes out to the organizers of this event and the volunteers whose tireless efforts have turned this event into a seamless and productive gathering. Your commitment to excellence has not gone unnoticed. And it's through your hard work that we have been able to enjoy today's lecture. In closing, let us carry forward the torch that has been lit today. We may step out from this hall not just as an educator, but as reformers, and as by the words of Dr. Clark, as transformers. Ready to embrace authentic experience as the new paradigm of learning. Together, let us reform education, not just for the sake of innovation, but for the empowerment of every learner who steps into our classroom. Thank you all for truly a memorable lecture. So we will just stand for the national anthem. We're going to close. You may be seated so that we can leave in an orderly fashion. So the lecturers will go first, and our guests, and then our students.
See how upset her. On and on and on and on. I'm a winner. You know that I'm a winner. Hey, watch out now. I'm on the sun. Oh, we're winning right now. Yeah, we're winning now. Say we're winning right now. Me forget that trophy to what me living right now. Cause I'm winning right now, yeah. And I'm chilling right now. Oh, we're winning right now. At Thanksgiving right now. Cause we're winning right now.